Greetings everyone, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, and I'm back to bring you another episode review from Season 8 of The Loud House. But not just any episode. Today we'll be looking at the first installment of the multi-episode European road trip arc, and there is definitely a lot to unpack with this one. So, let's get right into it. Our first European road trip episode is A Night to Remember. In this episode, the Louds travel to London, England, where Mick Swagger invites Luna for his knighting ceremony, but when Lincoln and his family run into Myrtle's old spy boss and try to prevent a potential robbery at the royal castle, Lincoln's missteps cause Mick to get captured, and the family later follows some clues to get the rock star back. I can say without exaggeration that when I first heard about this episode, I was really excited to see it. For those who may or may not know, I was on a 2-week vacation to England in the summer of 2024. Having gone to London myself, watching this episode is a lot more enjoyable on a personal level. Visually speaking, I thought the backgrounds and scenery were very well done. The row of houses, the narrow streets, the phone box, some very iconic British landmarks like Piccadilly Circus, Big Ben, and Tower Bridge, some of which I got to see while I was over there. Everything looked pretty accurate to the actual London, or at least close to it. To be fair, I'm not a UK native despite the name of my YouTube account. It's a long story, so I can't fully confirm that everything seen in this episode is 100% accurate. I'll leave that up to the British viewers in the comment section. Maybe someone can tell me which castle was the inspiration for the castle scene in this episode. I'm genuinely interested to know. Anyway, for this being the first installment of the European road trip arc, the best way I can put it would be that it had its share of positives, but it does have some issues with its characters and writing. First, I'll start with some of the characters. Lincoln and Luna were the #1 standout characters, and by association, Mick Swagger. Speaking of whom, this is the first time in which he plays a pretty significant role in the story, mostly being the one who needs to be rescued. We also see a continuation of his friendship with Luna that was frequently touched upon in previous seasons. Remember when they performed together back in Season 5? Well, they did it again here, so that was a pretty satisfying way to bring the episode to a close. You know it's real friendship when a famous musician invites one of their biggest fans and her entire family to the UK for a knighting ceremony. Now, even though I want to say this is a Lincoln and Luna episode because they collectively have the most focus and dialogue, this is more of an ensemble episode where the entire family is involved. Their adventure in trying to prevent and later resolve the mysterious kidnapping of Mick Swagger was kinda neat. It wasn't as intense or action-packed as it was in the No Time to Spy movie, but for a 22-minute episode, it was as good as it was going to get. Speaking of the spy movie, we get another cameo from X, Myrtle's old spy boss, once again confirming how the second movie is more canon to the TV show than the first one. She tells Lincoln that she and some of her fellow agents are working undercover when they get intel of something that is going to be stolen from inside the castle during Mick's knighting ceremony. The only problem is that they're not sure what the target is. This gets Lincoln excited and wants to join X in helping to thwart the bad guy's plan. This is where the story begins to take elements from the spy movie to form what is basically a different and shorter version of the film. Lincoln undergoes a mini arc where he learns the difference between being a professional spy and a rookie with some passable expertise and good intentions, and he ends up learning this lesson the hard way. X initially told Lincoln to leave everything to the professionals, but Lincoln proves he has good instincts when he can properly identify the other agents working undercover inside the castle. This impresses X, and she allows him and his family to participate in the mission. Unfortunately, Lincoln makes a few mistakes, and this leads to Mick Swagger being kidnapped, the target of the robbery. X decides to revoke Lincoln's agent status because of this, and therefore wouldn't even entertain the idea of looking into a potential clue he and Luna found that could lead to Mick's whereabouts. Technically, it was Lincoln's sisters who screwed up because they didn't have the type of instincts it takes to be a good spy compared to him, so Lincoln was banned from the mission because of something that wasn't really his fault. Still, much like what happened in the spy movie, Lincoln still felt guilty for what happened because he didn't use good judgment in determining what his sister's initial findings might have meant beneath the surface, and his inexperience and eagerness to prove he was a hero caused someone to get captured and potentially hurt when all of it could have been avoided. However, X does apologize after Mick is rescued and decides to reinstate Lincoln's agent status. Not only did Lincoln save Mick without any help from the actual professional spies, but he also learned to follow his instincts, like he did earlier by identifying who was working undercover inside the castle. To that end, X offers Lincoln a spot in her spy agency's training academy when he turns 18. So yeah, Lincoln's character journey in this episode is pretty much the same one from No Time to Spy by almost every metric. I don't necessarily consider that a bad thing because the story is still pretty good for what it was. The biggest drawback, however, is the significantly shorter runtime compared to the movie. The story here feels sort of rushed, with not a lot of time to build towards the ending and create a more dramatic tone, not to mention barely having a chance to see how the main villain was able to pull off their master plan. However, this doesn't mean I'm going to completely trash the writing, although there are some things I found sort of confusing and contrived. As far as most of the script is concerned, however, the writing is pretty decent and cohesive with how certain things are set up early in the plot and then play a pivotal role as the story develops. I'll break this section of the review down into several sections by talking about 3 characters who did the most to advance the story. I'll start with Luna, the one whose invitation from Mick started the whole thing. Luna was reading Mick's autobiography at the beginning of the episode and uses the book to piece together clues provided by Mick as a way of figuring out what could have happened to him following his kidnapping. She and Lincoln find Mick's special copper guitar pick outside the castle, one of his most prized possessions. In his book, it said he only uses that pick to play one song, a song about his first car, a blue tiny trooper. This gives them a clue that Mick may have deliberately dropped his pick as his way of saying he was hauled away in the same exact car his song was about. That turns out to be the case when Lisa tracks down the exact car they're looking for, and that's when Mick gives the family their second clue. According to his book, he has an ascot he wore for every show during one of his concert tours. Lisa speculates the ascot is most likely connected to a fan who was in the front row of every one of those concerts. Luna figures Mick dropped his ascot as his way of saying this concert goer was the one who kidnapped him, which indeed turns out to be true. Then there's Laurie making references to a reality show about British royals called Drama Kings. First, she uses her knowledge of the show to piece together the clues gathered by the Louts when trying to figure out what it is they're supposed to be protecting from the thief. First, Lana learned from some royal dogs that they overheard someone saying they were planning to steal the king's jams. Then Lucy overheard someone saying the king can kiss his precious shredder goodbye, but she couldn't get a good look of the person who said it. Thinking the targets are a literal collection of jams and a paper shredder as Laurie once saw in an episode of Drama Kings, Lincoln tells X to have her agent safeguard the rooms containing those items. However, it turns out jams and shredder were actually code words for a musician, in this case Mick Swagger. Mick was surrounded by secret agents, presumably protecting him, but then they left to look after the supposed targets Lincoln was talking about, which then allowed Mick, the actual target, to be kidnapped. This actually plays into Lincoln's character arc about having and subsequently lacking good instincts because he thought he was on the right track the whole time. Unfortunately, he didn't do a deeper analysis into Lana and Lucy's findings and put too much stock into Laurie thinking that what happened on a reality show was also happening in real life. This legitimately justified X's original decision to keep Lincoln away from the mission the first time, and later taking him off the case following Mick's kidnapping. Now, even though her knowledge of the TV show ended up making things worse in the first half of the story, Laurie does redeem herself in the second half by referencing her show again by saying she knows how to get inside the castle where Mick is being held hostage. It's by accessing a secret tunnel which can be identified by the colored stones on one of the outdoor statues. Yay for plot convenience! Of course, the family does end up finding Mick, but they are subsequently captured and are about to get eaten alive by some alligators. How ironic they were smart enough to follow the clues to find who they were looking for, but not smart enough to avoid walking right into the bad guy's trap. Is that a sign of naive protagonist or smart villain? Your guess is as good as mine. Now, before I continue talking about certain characters with specific storyline setups and payoffs, I do have to talk about the episode's main antagonist. The culprit behind Mick's kidnapping was a man known as the Earl of Nuttingham, which I'm guessing is supposed to be a reference to the actual city of Nottingham. He doesn't even have a name, he's just referred to as the Earl. Ordinarily, I would say this Earl of Nuttingham looks absolutely nothing like the real Earl of Nottingham, but considering this Earl represents a fictional city instead of the real one it's supposed to be a reference to, this is one real-life inconsistency not worth banging on about. Anyway, this guy has been an extremely loyal fan of Mick Swagger for decades, and that's clearly proven in his backstory. After his 100th concert, the Earl wrote Mick a letter asking if he would play at his private birthday party, but instead the rock star ended up playing a sold-out crowd in Rio, and the Earl felt Swagger had betrayed his biggest fan. That's why he captured Mick, so he could have a never-ending concert. The kind of concert where one man with a single guitar can simultaneously produce a drum beat and a bass line because cartoon logic. This would be a good place to talk about some of the problems I have with the writing. We never get an explanation on how the Earl was able to kidnap Mick. As in, how could he have managed to pull this off? Was he invited to the castle for the ceremony? Did he just sneak in without anyone noticing? There's no flashback showing how he could have carried out his plan. I have more reason to believe he was invited to the castle, since it's sort of implied Mick sent a letter to the Earl to say he was declining his birthday party request. Plus, given the guitar pick and ascot as clues, it's reasonable to assume Mick recognized the Earl from how frequently he attended his concerts. Clearly, Mick must have known the Earl was a dedicated fan, otherwise I don't believe he would have written back to the Earl at all. The one downside is he didn't think this Earl was crazy until he got shackled in the guy's basement. I mean, you know you're dealing with an insane superfan when they kidnap you using the same car you wrote a song about. Also, if I may take a moment to get back to X and her reasoning for banning Lincoln from helping her any further, Mick was kidnapped when the lights went out inside the castle. Would it have really made a difference if he was surrounded by secret agents at that moment? The answer can arguably go in either direction, so in a sense, X firing Lincoln from the mission was kinda unwarranted given how Mick was kidnapped with no one being able to see what was happening. So yes, there are parts in the story that leave you feeling confused and you're left with a lot of questions. But before I talk about another big head scratcher, let me resume talking about characters with storyline setups and payoffs, and this one involves Lincoln. He brought some of his David Steele gadgets to London and wanted to use them on the spy mission. He used his grappling hook to stop his family's rental bus from crashing down a hill by throwing it around a tree. Granted, it almost didn't work and they nearly went right over a cliff, but hey, conveniently placed trees near the edge are convenient, so it wasn't a total failure. Later, when Luna devises an escape plan by requesting a song in which the lyrics contain dance step instructions, Mick improvs the lyrics in the attempt to get the Earl to stand under a chandelier. This allows Lincoln to use some kind of device to cut the chandelier and subsequently trap the Earl, leading to his arrest. So even as a rookie who seemed a little in over his head at the beginning, Lincoln still made great use of his spy gadgets and instincts and ultimately succeeded in the rescue mission when X thought he couldn't do it. Then Luna throws Mr. Swagger his guitar pick, breaks free from his shackles, and frees the Louds from their cage. It's at this point Luna mentions how this isn't the first time Mick was held captive in a crazy fan's basement and needed to use a guitar pick to break free. This raises one of the biggest questions. If Mick already had an experience similar to the one he had in this episode, why would he drop his special guitar pick at all if he thought he was being kidnapped and then getting locked up somewhere? If he's been through this sort of thing before, couldn't he have held on to his pick and later use it to break out of the Earl's castle without the Louds? Did he think this time he'd be put in a position in which reaching for his pick would be impossible? It's hard to say given how we don't know the circumstances surrounding his first kidnapping. I know I'm probably overthinking this way more than I have to, and maybe I shouldn't. After all, trying to make sense of all this would mean no Loud family spy adventure, so we might as well chalk all of this up to mere plot convenience for the sake of storytelling. Either way, Mick is finally knighted, and he's so grateful for the Louds going out of their way to save his life that he offers them an all-expense-paid vacation to see the rest of Europe. I suppose the only other things left to talk about would be a few minor highlights. First, during the scene where the Louds were driving and subsequently flying their bus across Tower Bridge as the Baskervilles were opening up, was that supposed to be a reference to Spice World the movie? That was the first thing I thought of when watching the episode. And finally, I had to laugh when Lynn Sr. said he wanted to ride the tube to upper butts. For those unfamiliar with British culture, the tube is the common nickname for the London Underground transit system. I rode on one of these things when I was in London, but I never went to Upper Butts. Speaking of which, Upper Butts is an actual location in the town of Brentford in West London. What Lynn Sr. just said would sound totally normal to the average British person, but if you're not a country native, riding the tube to Upper Butts sounds a lot funnier and dirtier than it should be. If I release it, I'd be laughing about that too. Yes, I am that immature. Overall, this episode is just a different take on the No Time to Spy movie, with Lincoln going through a near-identical character arc, but with different circumstances. Like I said, it's not really bad, but in my opinion, the movie handled this kind of conflict a lot better. This is one of those episodes where you can't really condense everything into a 22-minute runtime. If this had been a 1-hour-long special, it could have worked better at building towards the climax and thus allowing the plot to become heavy heavier in tone, story, and character development. At a minimum, it could have reduced the number of contrived plot points I laid out, and you wouldn't be leaving with as many questions as you do here. And speaking of long-standing questions, this episode finally confirmed a suspicion I always had about the series, but was in complete denial about. When you consider the fact this episode was first released internationally in 2024, the story clearly takes place sometime after 2022. The monarch on Laurie's TV show is referred to as a king, so it's reasonable to assume the man who granted Mick his knighthood was King Charles. So all that supposed in-universe speculation and personal headcanon about the series taking place over the course of 2 or 3 years starting back in 2016 is completely tossed out the window. Otherwise, Lynn Sr. would have accidentally knocked Queen Elizabeth out of the castle, not some fat, bearded version of King Charles. So, f*** it, the series has a floating timeline like any other animated series. I know I should have expected something like this sooner rather than later given the many April Fool's Day and Christmas specials, but I really wanted to believe the series was still taking place in the 2010s. Guess not. Anyway, aside from my criticisms about some of the characters and the writing, it's some of the more positive aspects to the characters and the writing that still makes this episode a mostly passable first installment of the European road trip arc. Lincoln and Luna had some nice moments, the story was pretty engaging, the action sequences were kinda cool, the visuals were impressive, and the song performed by Mick and Luna was satisfactory. This sets the bar for the European road trip arc going forward, so we'll have to see which episodes can do better or worse than the one that started it all. With that said, I give A Night to Remember a 7.3 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of A Night to Remember. So I gotta ask, what did you guys think of this episode? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Cheerio, home slices!